There needs to be someone who is sort of the keeper and reiterator of the vision. Because there's just a ton of work to do. And a lot of times, you know, when you have to walk 1,000 miles and you take the first step, it looks like a long ways. And it really helps if there's someone there saying, well, we're one step closer. You know, the goal definitely exists. It's not just a mirage out there. So in 1,001 little and sometimes larger ways, the vision needs to be reiterated. I do that a lot.
Here's what I do specifically to help myself stay focused. First things first, when I wake up in the morning, I do not sleep next to my phone. The reason why I don't sleep next to my phone is because if you sleep next to it or use it as your alarm, your tendency is to look at it while you're in bed. That means that you're checking email before you've even thought about what your priorities are. Do not do that. That's tip number one. Tip number two, I have a pad of Post-it notes. Yes, Post-it notes next to my sink in my bathroom. Why? Well, because after I brush my teeth, haven't looked at my phone yet, I take a Post-it note out and I write the 3 things I need to focus on today. And then you know what I do with it? I stick it on the back of my phone. Now, why would I do that? Because I have my phone with me all the time. And so if it's on the back of my phone, I'm going to get a visual cue to remind me and keep it top of mind so I stay focused on it. Third thing that I do, it's a little trick I call 30 before 7:30. What that means, I spend 30 minutes before 7:30 a.m. just focused on getting my day organized and getting a few of the things that are my top priorities either finished or further down the field. So that's 30 minutes before 7:30 a.m. That's time for me. If you utilize those 3 things, don't sleep with your phone. Right after you brush your teeth, write out your 3 priorities and stick it on the back of your phone just like this, and spend 30 minutes before 7:30 for yourself. I promise you, you'll be shocked at how much more focused you are and you feel.
Things are packages of emphasis. Some things are emphasized in a product, some things are not done as well in a product, some things are chosen not to be done at all in a product. And so different people make different choices. And if the market tells us we're making the wrong choices, we listen to the market. I mean, we're just people running this company. We're trying to make great products for people. And so we have at least the courage of our convictions to say, we don't think this is part of what makes a great product. We're going to leave it out. Some people are going to not like that. They're going to call us names. It's not going to be in certain companies' vested interests that we do that, but we're going to take the heat because we want to make the best product in the world for customers. And we're going to instead focus our energy on these technologies, which we think are in their ascendancy and we think are going to be the right technologies for customers. And you know what? They're paying us to make those choices. That's what a lot of customers pay us to do, is to try to make the best products we can. And if we succeed, they'll buy them. And if we don't, they won't. And it'll all work itself out.
Truth is a pathless land. You know, we've all got our own personal truths. Now, there are certain principles that will help align us all. Just be true to your essential selves. Don't f*** other people over. Now, part of that, yeah, it is a bit annoying. Do you know what I think is really important? It's like, you know, like, say when I was a kid, it was all like apartheid and all that sort of stuff, and I sort of would pretend to be sort of angry about it, and obviously I agree with complete racial integration and racial equality, but actually when I was at home at night, I didn't really think, oh, bloody apartheid, I can't sleep. You know, it didn't bother me really. But say when I got ripped off, like a bus driver wouldn't give me my fare back, or when there's an ATM charge of $3.50, I'm prepared to go and kill. You know, or when Apple changed their charger, you're like, hey, you bastards, why'd you have to keep changing the charges for? You know, that stuff really affects me and impacts me. You know, so what I think we have to do is recognise we're in our own lives. We're being ripped off. They're ripping us off left and right. You know, like we recognise where those things are, recognise that those things are not necessary. And when people tell you there is no alternative, look at the people who are telling you that.
There's a funny story that goes along with how we came up with the title of this book. And we are all to blame. Here I am writing a book about the importance of working with people, interacting with people, human relationships, and yet the way I and the publisher interacted was we would send emails to each other with title suggestions. Every now and then we'd get on the phone, but it was mainly done through email. Somebody would send a list of their favorite, and somebody would write back, "That's junk, I kind of like that one." And it was a labored, horrible process. We never agreed. It was just talking at each other. And coincidence, I happened to be walking past the publisher's office and decided to stick my head in and say hello. Went upstairs and we sat down, and within, I think, 30 or 40 minutes, we had a title that we all fell in love with. And what you realize is we can tell an idea to someone over email, but you can't interact. And if you think about how ideas really happen, it's not presentation, response. It's interruption and backwards and forwards and battling and saying, no, that's not what I mean. And it's messy. And it's the messiness that cannot happen over an internet connection, over email, because everything is exact over email. It can happen over the phone, but it's so much better in person when you get to see someone's body language and you see the frustration and you try and re-explain yourself. And we told each other stories as opposed to telling each other what we think it should be. And the story that I told was not being able to understand what made the Marines so amazing at what they do. I sat down with a Marine Corps general, General Flynn actually, who wrote the foreword for the book. And I said to him, "What makes the Marines so great?" And he looked at me and said, "Officers eat last." And it sort of struck me that if you compare that to the business world and the entrepreneurial world, entrepreneurs are always told, pay yourself first, look after yourself first. And yet, I'm being told by this Marine general that it's the complete opposite. And there's a symbolic gesture, but more importantly, there's an importance to it. There's a photograph I saw, in these Kenya shootings that happened not so long ago. We had the amazing experience that a photographer happened to be in the building. Usually we see the aftermath, and here we now have photographs of the actual shooting going on. And there's one photograph that was in the New York Times that both haunted me and inspired me to this day. It haunted me and inspires me, I should say. And it's the photograph of a mother, in the sound of gunshots, lays herself on top of her child. And you see this picture of a mother lying on top of her child, and you realize that's what it is. That's what leadership is. That when there is danger, it's not protecting myself, but it's rather willing to put myself in harm's way to protect another. That's what eating last means. It means that I will give the very essence of life, food and water, I will give it to the person I love first, so that they may live, even if it means I eat less. And that's what Officers Eat Last means. It is symbolic, but it is also very real. And real leadership, real leaders, I've even given up the terminology of good leaders and great leaders. You're either a leader or you're not a leader. That's it. Real leaders, biological, anthropological leaders, are that mother who instinctively, without weighing the pros and cons or the bad things that may happen to her, throw herself on her child. That's what leadership is. Do we believe that our leaders would throw themselves on us, if they heard gunshots? If the economy shook, would they quickly throw themselves on us? That's what Leaders Eat Last means. It is very literal. It is very, very literal.
See the enlightenment, realized state that we'd like everybody to be in, and then we have this kind of mess, this quandary that we're in right now. So how do we make those little bridging steps?
I think we attain it within ourselves initially, and we communicate these ideas on a personal level. Spirituality, I can get, as you've just heard, I can be very verbose and loquacious on the topic, but really it just means be nice. It ain't hard, just be nice. You meet a homeless person, be nice. You get into a cab, be nice to the person. Don't see yourself as adversarial. Then the revolution has already occurred. People fear Armageddon, don't they? People fear the apocalypse, don't they? But for some, Armageddon has already occurred. The homeless people that walk our streets live already in a post-apocalyptic world. Armageddon will surely come for each of us, our own personal Armageddon, when each of us die. Isn't it redundant whether everyone simultaneously dies if each of us will individually die? Regardless, Armageddon is coming. So whilst these cataclysmic principles apply on the individual level,
people who think think we might be able to extend the human lifespan through biotechnology, merging with machines.
Yeah, that's all cool, man. But what I'm saying is that what we have to do is individually reach like our own personal alignment. We have to do the principles are all there. You know this. The principles are already there. We achieve detachment through meditation. We no longer then we are no once we can achieve enlightenment and once we put our satisfaction beyond our individual needs, we are no longer malleable by the pre-existing system. The system requires us to be selfish little consumerist pods. Once we go, oh, I ain't not bothered about that. It's easier for me because I've been famous now. I know that's boring. I've been rich now. I know that's boring. I fuck loads of people now. I know that's boring. I took loads of drugs now. No, that's boring. So all that's left is spiritual enlightenment. That's all that's left.
It's sad to see that people are disenchanted and nihilistic and depressed and anxious and aimless and perverse and vengeful and all of those things. It's terrible. And then to see people question whether that's necessary and then to start to rise out of it. It's like, it's so fun. Like last night I was after my talk, it's overwhelming. I don't usually think about these things, but I was after my talk last night, and so all these people line up, and you know, they have their 15 seconds with me, and they're kind of tentative. They're excited and attentive when they come up to talk to me, and then they have, you know, 15 seconds of time to tell me something. I'm really listening to them, and they're hesitant about whether or not to share the good news about their life, you know, and I think it's often because when people share good news about their life, people don't necessarily respond positively. You know, they don't get encouragement. And people need so little encouragement. Yeah. It's just unbelievable. And so they'll tell me something good, and I think, oh, that's so good. You know, somebody says, oh, I'm getting along way better with my father. I haven't seen him for 10 years, and now we get along. It's like, God, great. Yeah. And then the power of that, you can't overstate the power of that for individuals to get their life together. The individual is an unbelievably powerful force, and every single person who gets their act together a little bit has the capacity to spread that around them. It's a chain reaction, and so it's a lovely thing to see.
I had a really interesting thing the other day about I don't know who this yogi was. You might be able to work it out from the anecdote. Bertrand Russell, the intellectual and early CND, Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament pioneer, was like towards the end of his life, I think, like real committed to that whole CND deal. And he was visited by a yogi who said to him, look, you know, what does it matter if we get rid of nuclear weapons? We are still the consciousness that created nuclear weapons. It will find some other outlet. What we need to address is the inner space, this intention, this attention, the desire to create that kind of technology. As long as we have that, we won't resolve the issue. The nuclear weapon is a symbol, an emblem, an expression of that phenomena, of that frequency. So we should address that. And Bertrand Russell said, no, let's just get rid of nuclear weapons. This is a really significant issue. I ain't got time to get into your mystical, bloody Vedic approach to it. Let's get rid of the weapons. But you know, sort of, I think it's possible to agree with both men in that instance. And like that all that. You know, people that criticise me, people that adore me, they're responding really to themselves. They're responding to their own consciousness. They're responding to their own reality. And so I try to... Now I know what my intention is. I know where my attention is, and that is what defines my life. I try not to allow my experience of reality to be too diluted by other people's input. I mean, I love the approval, and I'm not so keen on the condemnation. But like, also, I look a lot at the source. I look a lot where it comes from, and like, you know, I don't mind Fox News hating me. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. You know, that I can't change who I am for Fox News. What would I become?
Psychologists have been. Not all psychologists, obviously, but the psychological profession is neck deep in this pathology, has been beating the self-esteem drum for 50 years. Oh no, you're okay, you should feel good about yourself. Like, you're fine the way you are. It's like you think, well, that's a calming message for people. It's like, no, it's not. It's not at all. And I watch my audiences, it's like, it's full of people in the audience who think, I'm suffering a lot more than I think is tenable. A whole bunch of it's my fault. My life is not in the order it should be. I know I'm doing 50 things wrong. It's like, what the hell's wrong with me? What's wrong with the people around me? This is really serious. And some, well-meaning person comes up and says, you're okay just the way you are. It's like, no one wants that message. It's like, no, I'm not okay the way I am. I'm not okay at all the way I am. I know that. And so, when I'm speaking when I'm speaking now, I say to people, well, you're nowhere near what you could be. That's the positive message. It's like, yeah, you're a mess, but you don't have to stay that way. If you're a mess, you know it, obviously. You're suffering away like so much you can barely tolerate it. It's like, that's okay. You could do something about it. And that's the thing that turns the lights on. It's like, you could do something about it. It's like, oh.
You were honored for, you think the characters like Good Will Hunting, what was it?
Yeah, Good Will Hunting won the Academy Award for that.
Is there any place that you want to be?
I think where I am right now. It's a good place.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that just a little.
I will share with you.
Oh, share.
Testify, brother.
Yeah, please.
It is that feeling of being, doing like the stand-up combined with 1 hour photo insomnia, kind of pushing the envelope in terms of what people perceive I can do. Mm-hmm. Especially in playing a character, these darker, troubled, and in many cases, nasty, vicious. And that helps to just, push it through, because you're looking at now, once it's at this age to say, you're playing characters now, which is what I always was doing before, but now it's a given.
Yeah.
You're heading towards Gabby time. Oh, good. Don't you see? Yeah. They haven't found any weapons. Don't you know what he's doing? Can't you see? He's trying to defuse the economy. He's letting people go and they're hiring the man from the train. They got the guy who ran the railroads. Don't you see what's going on, Luke? Well, come on, Corky. You let him go. But it's that idea of, playing these characters and doing this. It's been a great combination, like a really good year to just push the envelope. And I think that's always what I want to do, is to try different things and kind of always change perceptions.
And change the rhythm. You can...
Yeah, break up. It is a rhythm. It's basically saying, okay, now we hit it, that, and then, hit a little harder, and then back off, and then go berserk, like, with the stand-up, which is just free form, and then come back and play something so controlled, like in 1 hour photo. Those are all possible. I mean, I was trained at Juilliard. I went for 3 years and left, and then went and did stand-up. But the stand-up was always just kind of a great release, and then still having that ability to play, both, and having that range really helps. For me, it's great. And you mentioned the other part, having great friends and family that just make life extraordinary, and a world to still go out and see and learn about, which is the most important of all.
Do not cast pearls before swine. And what that means is that if people are not listening to you, stop talking to them. And that is the best piece of advice that I can give you. And what happens is that if you stop talking to people who aren't listening to you and start watching them instead, they will tell you what they're up to. But so if you have things to say them, but you find people that will listen, talk to them. The ones who aren't listening, pull back. Because you're devaluing what you have to say by offering it to an audience that does nothing but reject it. And that's a good guideline to life in general. So pull back.
A lot of people come to me and they say, well, I want to be an entrepreneur. And I go, oh, that's great. What's your idea? And they go, well, I don't have one yet. And I say, well, I think you should go get a job as a busboy or something until you find something you're really passionate about, because it's a lot of work. And I'm convinced that about half of what separates the successful entrepreneurs from the non-successful ones is pure perseverance. It is so hard. You pour so much of your life into this thing. There are such rough moments in time that most people give up. I don't blame them. I mean, it's really tough, and it consumes your life. I mean, if you've got a family and you're in the early days of a company, I can't imagine how one could do it. I'm sure it's been done, but it's rough. I mean, because it's pretty much an 18-hour-a-day job, 7 days a week for a while. So unless you have a lot of passion about this, you're going to not survive. You're going to give it up. So you got to have an idea or a problem or a wrong that you want to right that you're passionate about. Otherwise, you're not going to have the perseverance to stick it through. And I think that's half the battle right there. It's hard to remember how bad it was, in early 80s, with IBM taking over the world with the PC, with DOS out there. It was far worse than the Apple II. And they tried to copy the Apple II, and they'd done a pretty bad job, and you needed to know a lot. And so things were kind of slipping backwards, and Macintosh was You saw the 1984 commercial. Put that, I hope you have that in your archives. You know, Macintosh was basically this, this relatively small company, you know, in Cupertino, California, taking on the Goliath, IBM, and saying, wait a minute, your way is wrong. This is not the way we want computers to go. This is not the legacy we want to leave. This is not what we want our kids to be learning. This is wrong, and we are going to show you the right way to do it. And here it is. It's called Macintosh, and this is so much better that it's going to beat you. And we are going to do it. And that's what Apple stood for.
I find that levels of success in almost any industry or area correlate to a person asking great questions. In some cases, they seem absurd. In fact, the hallmark, in a way, of great questions is that they sound completely ridiculous. So someone might ask, like Peter Thiel, why can't you achieve your 10-year goals in the next 6 months? As a thought exercise, that's a good question to answer for yourself. And these types of questions come up surprisingly often with very, very impressive folks, whether it's in business, military, entertainment, or otherwise. And the way you can get better at questions is by studying interviews, in part. So I studied Larry King, I studied Charlie Rose, I studied Terry Gross, I studied go down the list. I studied Tony Robbins, who does in-person, one-on-one interventions at his events in front of 10,000, 5,000 people. And he's just genius with how he uses questions to like pattern interrupt and grab someone's attention and divert them in a more productive direction. Now, why is that relevant? It's relevant because thinking is the process of asking questions. You're asking yourself questions and then you're answering them in your own head. So if you get better at asking other people questions, you get better at asking yourself questions, which means you're improving your thought performance and level of thinking.
Some of them are going to sound like, well, you've heard it before, but it's worth re-emphasizing. I think the first is you need to work, depending upon how well you want to do, and particularly if you're starting a company, you need to work super hard. So what does super hard mean? Well, when my brother and I were starting our first company, instead of getting an apartment, we just rented a small office and we slept on the couch. And we showered at the YMCA, and we're so hot up we had just one computer. So the website was up during the day, and I was coding at night, 7 days a week, all the time. And I sort of briefly had a girlfriend in that period, and in order to be with me, she'd have to sleep in the office. So work hard, like every waking hour. That's the thing I would say particularly if you're starting a company. And I mean, if you do simple math, say like, okay, if somebody else is working 50 hours and you're working 100, you'll get twice as much done in the course of a year as the other company. The other thing I'd say is that if you're creating a company or if you're joining a company, the most important thing is to attract great people. So either join a group that's amazing, that you really respect, or if you're building a company, you've got to gather great people. I mean, all a company is a group of people that have gathered together to create a product or service. And so depending upon how talented and hardworking that group is, and the degree to which they are focused cohesively in a good direction, that will determine the success of the company. So do everything you can to gather great people if you're creating a company. Then I'd say focus on signal over noise. A lot of companies get confused. They spend money on things that don't actually make the product better. So, for example, at Tesla, we've never spent any money on advertising. We put all of the money into R&D and manufacturing and design to try to make the car as good as possible. And I think that's the way to go. So for any given company, just can keep thinking about, are these efforts that people are expending, are they resulting in a better product or service? And if they're not, stop those efforts. And then the final thing is to sort of don't just follow the trend. So you may have heard me say that it's good to think in terms of the physics approach or first principles, which is, rather than reasoning by analogy, you boil things down to the most fundamental truths you can imagine, and you reason up from there. And this is a good way to figure out if something really makes sense, or if it's just what everybody else is doing. It's hard to think that way. You can't think that way about everything. It takes a lot of effort. But if you're trying to do something new, it's the best way to think. And that framework was developed by physicists to figure out counterintuitive things like quantum mechanics. So it's really a powerful method. Anyway, so that's, and then I think that the final thing I would encourage you to do is, now is the time to take risk. You don't have, yeah, you don't have kids. Your obligation. Well, sorry, probably don't have kids. But as you get older, your obligations increase. So and once you have a family, you start taking risk not just for yourself, but for your family as well. It gets much harder to do things that might not work out. So now is the time to do that before you have those obligations. So I would encourage you to take risks now. Do something bold. You won't regret it. Thank you.
I have an old-fashioned belief that I should expect to make money in things that I understand. And when I say understand, I don't mean understand, what the product does or anything like that. I mean understand what the economics of the business are likely to look like 10 years from now or 20 years from now. I know, in general, what the economics of, say, Wrigley chewing gum will look like 10 years from now. The internet isn't going to change the way people chew gum. It isn't going to change which gum they chew. If you own the chewing gum market in a big way, and you've got Double Mint and Spearmint and Juicy Fruit, those brands will be there 10 years from now. So I can't pinpoint exactly what the numbers are going to look like on Wrigley, but I'm not going to be way off if I try to look forward on something like that. That evaluating that company is within what I call my circle of competence. I understand what they do, I understand the economics of it, I understand the competitive aspects of the business. So figuring out the economic consequences. TV. I think there's, 20, 25 million sets a year sold in the United States. I don't think there's one of them made in the United States anymore. You'd say TV set manufacturer, what a wonderful business. Everybody, nobody had a TV in 1950, or thereabouts, 45 to 50. Everybody has multiple sets now, but nobody in the United States has made any real money making the sets. They're all out of business. The Magnavoxes, the RCAs, all of those companies. Radio was the equivalent of the 20. Over 500 companies making radios in the 1920s. Again, I don't think there's a U.S. radio manufacturer at the present time. But Coca-Cola, what was it, 1884 at Jacobs Pharmacy or whatever, the fellow comes up with something. A lot of copiers over the years. But now you've got a company that is selling roughly 1.1 billion 8-ounce servings of its product, not all Coke, Sprite, and some others, daily throughout the world 117 years later. So understanding the economic characteristics of a business is different than predicting the fact that an industry is going to do wonderfully. And so when I look at the internet businesses, or I look at tech businesses, I say this is a marvelous thing, and I love to play around on the computer, and now I order my books from Amazon and all kinds of things, but I don't know who's going to win. And unless I know who's going to win, I'm not interested in investing. I'll just play around on the computer. And defining your circle of competence is the most important aspect of investing. It's not how important, how large your circle is. You don't have to be an expert on everything. But knowing where the perimeter of that circle of what you know and what you don't know is, and staying inside of it, is all important. Tom Watson Sr., who started IBM, said in his book, he said, I'm no genius, he said, but I'm smart in spots, and I stay around those spots. And that is the key. So if I understand a few things, and I stick in that arena, I'll do okay. And if I don't understand something, but I get all excited about it because my neighbors are talking about it and the stocks are going up and everything, If they start fooling around someplace else, eventually I'll get creamed, and I should.
All right, last question. 3 pieces of advice to entrepreneurs. What are your 3 pieces? I'm an entrepreneur, so you can share them with me.
Okay.
How would you advise me?
Well, first of all, I really need to give some thought to, like, how can I provide advice that would be most helpful? And I'm not sure I've given enough thought to that to give you the best possible answer. But I think certainly being focused on something that you're confident will have high value to someone else, and just being really rigorous in making that assessment. Because people tend to, a natural human tendency is wishful thinking. So a challenge for entrepreneurs is to say, well, what's the difference between really believing in your ideals and sticking to them versus pursuing some unrealistic dream that doesn't actually have merit? And that is a really difficult thing to tell. Can you tell the difference between those two things?
Right.
You know? So you need to be sort of very rigorous in your self-analysis. I think certainly extremely tenacious, and then just work like hell. I mean, you just have to put in, 80 to 100-hour weeks every week.
Gosh.
And then
a lot of work.
All those things improve the odds of success.
Okay.
I mean, if other people are putting in 40-hour work weeks and you're putting in 100-hour work weeks, then even if you're doing the same thing, you know that in 1 year you will achieve what they achieve. You will achieve in 4 months what it takes them a year to achieve.
There is very little difference, if any, between a very high-priced business education and what's available for a lot less money. So I went to the University of Nebraska at Lincoln my last year in college. I went to Wharton for a couple of years before that. I learned just as much at the University of Nebraska as I did at Wharton. And there's nothing against Wharton. I mean, it's just we had a very good school here. I had some terrific professors at Lincoln. And so I would not assume that if I was paying a few $1,000s for an education here in the state, for example, versus paying huge amounts elsewhere, that it was going to make a lot of difference. A lot of the education, you need to be prodded in the right direction, but an awful lot of it is self-taught. I mean, Andrew Carnegie did a wonderful thing in this country in terms of libraries, and I used to spend a lot of time at libraries. I even got locked in at the University of Omaha, what was then the University of Omaha, and I couldn't get out for hours. And one night I got so entranced with what I was reading. But there's all kinds of information available now with the internet. It's so much easier than it was then. So it's out there to be taken, and it isn't necessary to pay $30,000 or $35,000 a year to go to some big name school to get the education at all. I mean, if you're going to learn accounting, which is probably the most important course you'd take in business, if you're going to learn accounting, you can learn accounting absolutely as well, in my view, going to UNO as going to Harvard. I mean, I see. I'd bet on that, and so I wouldn't run up huge bills in terms of getting a business education. Now, if you're going to get a medical education, I mean, there's certain professions where there may not be any way around spending a fair amount of money and getting in debt to some degree. You've got to make that decision yourself, but I'd certainly try to minimize it. And I would have it figured out how I would handle that debt in, say, a 5-year period after I got out of school, or I would think twice about incurring it.
We still had a lien on the house, still facing bankruptcy, still fighting like crazy. I was still unemployed. They still hadn't figured out the solution yet for the business. And I was about to turn off the TV, and there on the TV, there was this rocket launching, and I thought, oh my gosh, that is it. I am going to launch myself out of bed like a rocket ship, like NASA, right here, had launched me out of that bed. And I'm going to move so fast that I don't think. I'm going to beat my brain. Now, here's a really interesting point. I talk a lot about your instincts and inner wisdom. And we can get into this a little bit later, but a lot of us talk about the fact that you have a gut feeling. But what all this research that I've done for the book and all the speaking that I do, what I've discovered that's fascinating is actually when you set goals, when you have an intention on something that you want to change about your life, your brain helps you. What it does is it opens up a checklist, and then your brain goes to work trying to remind you of that intention that you set. And it's really important to develop the skill, and I say that word purposefully, the skill of knowing how to hear that inner wisdom and that intention kicking in and leaning into it quickly. So for me, my brain saying, that's it, right there, move as fast as a rocket, Mel. I wanted to change my life. And I think most people that are miserable or that are really like dying to be great and dying to have more, we want to change. We want to live a better life. We want to create more for our families. We want to be happier. The desire is there. Again, it's about how do you go from knowledge to action. So the first thing in this story that's important is realizing that the answer was in me. And my mind was telling me, pay attention. Could have also been the bourbon. I had a couple of Manhattans that night. But anyway, the next morning, the alarm goes off, and I pretended NASA was there. It's the stupidest story. I literally went 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I counted out loud, and then I stood up. And I'll never forget standing there in my bedroom. It was dark, it was cold, it was winter in Boston. And for the first time in 3 months, I had beaten my habit of hitting the snooze button. I couldn't believe it, and I thought, wait a minute. Counting backwards, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Well, the next morning I used it again and it worked. The next morning I used it again and it worked. The next morning I used it again and it worked. And then I started to notice something really interesting. There were moments all day long, just like that 5-second moment in bed, where I knew, knowledge, what I should do. And if I didn't move within 5 seconds, my brain would step in and talk me out of it. Every human being has a 5-second window, might even be shorter for you. You have about a 5-second window in which you can move from idea to action before your brain kicks into full gear and sabotages any change in behavior. Because remember, your brain is wired to stop you from doing things that are uncomfortable or uncertain or scary. It's your job to learn how to move from those ideas that could change everything into acting on them.
One of the things that's really interesting about the Old Testament is that, and the Jews in the Old Testament, is that they don't take the path of Cain. Every time they're walloped by God, which is like fairly frequently, they say, we must have done something wrong and we have to set ourselves right. And that's an unbelievably heroic attitude, because that's the alternative to cursing fate. It's like you take the responsibility for failure onto yourself. And you think, well, if I just had my act together a little bit more, if I took advantage of every opportunity that was put in front of me, if I wasn't resentful and bitter, then I could have done something that would have tilted the situation in a different direction. And like, that's almost inevitably true. Dostoevsky, I think, said something like, every man is responsible for everything that happens to him and everything that happens to everyone else. And that's, you know, it's a crazy statement, right? It's a crazy statement, and he was a pretty extreme person in many, many ways. But there's a level at which that's metaphysically true, you know, because what happens is that it's failure to act often that's the most catastrophic. You know, I mean, it's to not do the right thing when the situation presents itself, and it's very specific. You know, you're constantly in situations where you could do the right thing if you were willing to take a risk that's actually of relatively moderate size. And you know that you could take the risk, and you know that you should take the risk, and you don't. And that happens to people all the time. And then what happens is the thing that they didn't oppose grows a little bit, and they shrink a little bit, and that starts a loop.